welcome to the workshop. This is the title of our workshop, and there's 4 of us are running this workshop, which takes about an hour. And apologies, we have a lot of slides. That's because we are researchers, all of us, and researchers love slides. But we hope that whenever you want to comment or ask or have a dialogue, please feel free to do that. Maybe we should first introduce ourselves. My name is Johanna Kiili. I come from Finland, from the University of Jyväskylä, and I work there as a senior lecturer and a researcher at the moment.
And I'm Lotta Jägevik from Lund University in Sweden, and I work there as senior lecturer.
Hello all of you, my name is Johanna Moilanen. I also come from Finland, from the University of Jyväskylä. I work as a senior researcher at the moment in the Department of Philosophy and Social Sciences, and discipline is social work.
Like me, yeah. But my name is Sirpa Kannasoja. Yeah.
So the 3 of us come from the same university, and then Lotta from Sweden, from Lund.
And also from social work.
Yes, social work, all 4 of us. And the aim of the workshop is to talk to you about this contact person services that we have in Nordic countries. And we have 2 research projects going on in Finland and in Sweden. So we talk about those projects, and then we talk about a little bit about the history of the contact person services, which is quite similar to mentoring, but we don't use that name or concept for this service. And then we kind of compare these a little bit at the end of the workshop. And we hope we have time for joint discussion, but it might be that we have so much to talk about. That's the reason we hope that you interrupt us. Just ask us to have a dialogue or ask a comment whenever you feel like. And then what was the one? Okay, that's actually what I just said. So that's the kind of a basic layout of this workshop. But I think first we could talk a few words about Finland and about the contact person. Would you like to have this so it's...
You can also change if it's...
Okay, it's fine.
Okay,
Yeah, you just said
yes.
to me when I do.
Okay. At very first, a few words about the joint Nordic background that we have when it comes to contact person programs and also contact family programs. These are the two support measures that are used very widely in the Nordic countries. As Johanna, my colleague, already said, the contact person or CP programs have been very widely used in child and family social work, both in Finland and Sweden, and also in Norway and Denmark. And what is maybe the big difference when we come to comparing the youth mentoring is that these contact person programs have used as an established part of the public, usually municipal child welfare services. And that is very actually close cooperation that is done by the volunteer workers and the social workers and other officials in public child welfare services. The basic idea of the Nordic contact person program is very similar to youth mentoring. It is that voluntary workers, laypersons, work as a contact persons, and they are used in delivering public child welfare services or child protection services. We use these both terms to describe the same kind of work that is done with children, young people and families. It is child welfare or child protection. They are not so easy to separate in the Nordic context. As you might know, the Nordic child welfare system, both in Finland and Sweden, takes a very preventive and family service-oriented view on child welfare issue. And that means also that the intervention threshold is very low, and the child protection or child welfare is the part of the broader social service system. And we use mainly in-home services in child protection, or so-called open care services. We use that term also.
Then I just want.
Okay, it's the next slide. So, very briefly, what are the CP programs in Finland? At first, in Finland, contact persons were originally meant to be provided by the Municipal Child Welfare Agency as a municipal child and family social work. But at the present, we notice privatization and this marketization phenomena. The municipal agency also purchases the service from private for-profit or non-profit organizations, but it is still having the main responsibility for the service. And contact persons have originally been, and actually still are, volunteers providing lay support for children and parents. But nowadays, it's also professional contact persons that are used as a contact persons, and they are usually the professionals from the field of social welfare, youth work, etc. We also have some similar support programs, including also a few mentoring programs launched and run by NGOs, for example the Save the Children organization. And this means that we had a very wide range of different support schemes with similar like objective, though organizers and forms of funding vary.
The next one.
Yes, please. Maybe I will pass this very quickly, just saying that we have had these contact person programs for over 4 decades in Finland, from the beginning of the 1970s. So it's very well established and practice that have a long history. And maybe that's the important thing from this slide, and we just
And then
go on.
we could add that we still don't have any statistics collected about the service. We actually don't know.
What is happening
Nationally.
in practice.
And we have very little research, even though it has been running for 40 years, which is quite astonishing.
Yes. But what does it mean in practice, these CP programs? How are they done in practice? The practice is that families can apply the contact person by themselves, or the initiative can be done by social services, other services like school, psychiatric services, and so on. And then the municipal social worker first assesses and decides on the need of provision. And before any kind of supportive relationships could be started, an official decision must be made about the terms and conditions under which the CP will be collaborating with the child and his or her family. And of course, in that phase, the efforts are made to match the child to an appropriate contact person. And usually or almost every time, contact person programs are run as a one-to-one relationship, not, for example, as a school-based like school-based mentoring is, for example, run. And also the official agreement to start a relationship must be made and signed by all parties, meaning child, his or her parents, contact person, social worker. And it's usually valid for 1 year at a time, but on the other hand, it may last for several years, but it is evaluated at least in every year, once a year. The contact person is expected to report regularly on progress made in his her relationships with the child. She or he must also be trained and supervised, and this training and supervision is usually provided by the social workers or other related professionals. And then when it comes to evaluation and the follow-up, the annual or biannual follow-up meetings are organized, and the child, parents, the CP and the social worker is participating in these follow-up meetings. And the main duty of the social worker, the municipal social worker, is to monitor the practice and oversee the rights of the children and parents, and also besides the support families as a whole. And then I said,
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can I ask a question? What is the difference between contact person and social worker? You say something that the organization social workers
they are
viewing the contact person, the work of the contact person, or what's the difference between?
That's a good question, and we're trying to figure out what is the content of the work that the contact person and child together do. But we could say many things about the goals of this practice, but the basic thing is that the contact person is the voluntary worker. She or he is not an official or the professional. He does it as a voluntary work. But
She or he is trained to do.
yes,
things.
yes, but the training is not like a degree-based training. It's the short training.
Few days usually.
Mm.
So they are laypersons, so-called laypersons, to do the job, and the work of the social worker is to monitor and oversee the process.
The main duty of them is to spend time with the child, and that could be, as we can imagine, many things.
Yeah, that could be many
You have
things.
also a question.
Kind of third adult.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Exactly. Yes.
So if I get it correctly, the social worker really said was of course the more like relationship kind of, and
Yeah.
the contact person is actually the one doing that voluntary with the
Doing the actual job.
actual work.
Yes,
Okay, okay.
exactly. Yes.
Yes, we are. I have also a question to understand it very well, but the municipality is responsible.
Yes.
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 Keep is always responsible.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
As a public agent. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And they have a very strong connection, contact persons, to the municipality also.
Yeah.
But the contact persons can be there can be in between NGOs that are recruiting the contact persons, but still they are on the responsibility of the municipality.
Yes.
So this is a little bit tricky.
This is
Yeah.
complex.
This
Yes.
is complex because it kind of combines the private and the public and the third sector all together
Yeah.
and make a soup. So to say.
A very large network.
Yeah, it is a network.
Yes.
The next
Okay.
one.
Yes. Then I say just few words about the previous research. As Johanna earlier said, there's the research knowledge is very scant, and even descriptive statistics is lacking about the contact person programs in Finland. And we have only few academic studies, 3 PhD studies. One of them is mine, social work PhD study, and even though we have a very scant research knowledge, something has came up of these researches, and all of these 3 studies are illuminating challenges related to child's position and needs that are mostly determined by adults in contact person programs. The broad aim of these activities is to strengthen the social inclusion of children and families by reinforcing their social networks. But there are many problems related to these goals and aims when it comes to these programs, because they can be so loosely defined. What are the goals and what are the aims? Another also very important finding, I think, is that children are only able to decide on minor matters in contact person programs. For example, what to do at the next meeting, what would I like to do, whereas more substantial matters like with whom to start a relationship or what is this relationship for actually are outside their powers. And my interpretation, I also used kind of historical research methods in my PhD. My interpretation and conclusion was that CP programs are an example for a very conventional way of conceptualizing and understanding child-adult relations. And they are in everyday discourse, they are thought to be formed primarily as biological family relations, kind of imitating the child-mother, child-father relationship. And that was one of my main findings. But then, is it Lotta, your turn now?
Would you like to ask something about Finland first? Is there any questions at this point? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry if it's not clear to me, but why can the child only decide on minor matters?
You mean why the child decides on minor matters only?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's the kind of a historical way of organizing the service. That
It's
usually
very adult-centric.
It is adult-centered.
In practice.
It is usually the initiative usually comes from the parents, and then they talk with the social workers, and then they decide together which one should be. And very rarely nobody asks the child that do you want to form a relationship with this adult.
And because it's also used as a child welfare or child protection intervention,
Yes.
it might be also the
One
reason
reason.
behind this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
As we are talking about the where they can decide until what age are children under this
In this
in
practice.
this program? Yeah.
School age children usually.
Usually,
Who knows?
What is
We
it,
actually
16 or 18?
yes, it's possible. But the usual age, who remembers? We just made a
We
survey
actually
on
have a
this.
slide there.
We can return
Later
this
on, so we
later.
can cover that.
Oh,
Yes.
I haven't heard it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I
It's
wasn't
okay.
paying attention
Yes,
then.
but
No,
mostly
it's coming.
It's
It's
coming. It's
Oh.
coming. Yes, but it's mostly school age children.
Yeah, and then
Primary.
Yes, primary and elementary.
Yeah, and contact family services are usually for smaller children. So now we are talking about contact person services. And then contact family is also one that we have done research on.
Yes.
And they are smaller children.
And
they
it means
usually
that there's a voluntary family who is working together with the child.
child.
When yes,
and concretely usually
and visits.
yeah, and it usually means that the child goes to the family for a weekend once per month. But with the contact person they meet
More often.
more often. Yeah. And not in their homes of the contact persons. They usually go to the forests or the movies or see the football games or something like that. Yeah. But then Sweden, if I give you this, you can
Yeah, I think
change.
Yeah,
Can
okay,
you see?
so the short version of the Swedish program is it's kind of the same as the Finnish program. So I'm gonna keep it fairly quick. It's very similar, but we have the same situation where it's been around for a long time, but we know very little about it. There are interventions at some different places in the Swedish welfare system where you connect a volunteer to who is like an established member of society in some sense to a person who you feel is drifting up into some sort of unwanted behavior. It could be many different kinds. So we have it in the criminal justice system, for example, with volunteer supervisors and professional supervisors also. It depends, but so it's used in different areas, and with the contact persons, it's mainly teens, I guess, and we also have the contact families who work more with the younger children. So already in the very first child welfare legislation that we had in 1902, professionals and volunteers working together was mentioned. Back then, social work was more focused on volunteers, really, like more volunteer run. Welfare state grew, but this combination of professionals and volunteers sort of tagged along. And it's mentioned in many different legislations going back that it should be more structured, there should be more directions for how to work together, but there are never really any initiatives to actually do it. It's the lack is mentioned many times. So by the 1960s, where the state was like the main stakeholder and responsible for most work with children, as it is today, it was brought up again, like it was difficult to find suitable volunteers, there was a lack of support for the volunteers, and it's still pretty much the same. Like you mentioned, in Finland there is at least some sort of a few days of education. I don't think we have even that in Sweden. Actually, I don't really know because there's no research on it, but it's not formalized that you have to have it at least. Some municipalities may. That's one of the things we're trying to find out just at this moment. So, in the 1980s, Social Service Act, the Child Protection Act, was integrated with other areas of legislations. Based on a holistic perspective, like salutagenesis, for example, was very fashionable. It was a lot of like we should integrate different sort of interventions. And in the new act, the supervisors, they were called that before, were now named contact persons and contact families. So that's from where we had like the term being used. Professionals, still the cornerstone of the social services, and again, it's put in that there was a need to structure the cooperation with volunteers, but there were no guidelines, and there still are no guidelines for recruitment or support or how to cooperate, or basically anything. So little is known still about who the children are who are given these interventions, why they're given, what the motives are, what the expectations are. There are no formal goals, and so this last is from a report from 2020. So it's a problem that's been around for a while, and we do have a little bit of statistics, but this is pretty much all the statistics we have. But still, there are about 1,500 children appointed a contact person or contact family by the social services every year. And we also know that it's declining somewhat. It's still the most common, like small intervention, but it's declining a little bit. It's means tested, so that is regulated by the Social Service Act. And the contact person can also be used for adults with disabilities, but then it's inside of a different sort of legislation. And the contact person, it can formally only be initiated by the young person and his or her family, or by the social services. But in a pilot, we found that it was often someone else's idea. Sort of like the school tell the parents, maybe you should have a contact person or a contact family, or the psychiatry tells the family or something like that, and then they do the formal application. But formally, it's social services or family. And the volunteers, that's a difference to Finland. The volunteers are assigned directly by the social services individually, so they're not connected to any NGOs and they're not organized in any other way but by the social services. And they are paid a small sum, like fairly symbolic, but for and depending on frequency and complexity, and it follows guidelines that are made by the National Organization for Local Authorities. And difficult to calculate, said the social workers that we talked to. I will come back to that. But from previous research, there has been one national follow-up study who followed families who were recruited, had the intervention between 1981 and 1997, so it's a little bit old, but it's the only one we have. And they found there were no long-term effects, but it was nice, pretty much. It had no negative effect and people liked it, sort of, but no long-term outcomes at least. And smaller local studies following sort of the same direction. It's appreciated. People are very positive to it. Lack of social network is the most common reason, and assigning a professional to work as a contact person. So, like for example, an active social worker, but who works as a volunteer in this particular case, has become more and more usual. It was less usual like 10 years ago, maybe. And then we also have two other versions of it. Sort of, we have the especially qualified contact person, who are like formally qualified, they have to be, and it's a more precise and structured intervention with sort of the same, you call it contact person in both cases, and then it's provided by the social service, and they need to have relevant experience and or education in psychosocial work. So it's kind of vague, but still less vague than the other version. So this could be a professional taking it on as a professional, be getting paid during their working hours. And the meetings are much more frequent, 10 hours a week, whereas like a usual contact person would be maybe once a week or something like that for a few hours. And it has an aim, which differentiates it from the other contact persons also, which is to promote pro-social development and reduce the risk of antisociality. That's kind of a tongue twister. And also to enable children or youth to remain at home, to avoid a placement outside of home. There is little research on this too, and the latest evaluation was inconclusive. Like, we have some studies showing that it might have positive effects and some showing more like no effects. I think this is my last slide at this point. So we also have mentoring programs, and they're usually provided by NGOs, the largest one being in Mentor Sweden, which is a branch of mentoring interventional that we heard of some today. We also have something called Hassela that has its roots in the user movement with drugs. So it's sort of similar to AA, but they have started mentoring programs also for all sorts of social programs. And qualifications can vary, the NGOs kind of decide on that, but there are usually no requirements for formal education, but they have their own sort of training programs and so forth. And as with contact person, and especially qualified contact persons, we know very little about the outcomes. And the research that is done is very inconclusive. So that's background, I guess, about Sweden. And maybe you got the difficult questions now, and a lot is similar, but
But would you like to ask something or make an observation, please?
You told us also, I don't know if it is the same case for Sweden, that the contract is for 1 year, renewable. I mean, how many years